I'm Beck and welcome to a video where I discuss some beginner fantasy titles. So if you want to get into the massive category of fantasy, these are some places that will be like an easing into of sorts for the genre, because fantasy can get very complicated very quickly, obviously because it is creating an entirely new to you world with all of the new characters that you're going to encounter, and sometimes magic systems as well, and sometimes parallel worlds. It is very overwhelming, to say the least. It is my bread and butter though. It's something that I love, and so I've got a few here that I can recommend to you because they are, like I said, easy to get into. And I'll start with one that I'm currently rereading, and that is A Darker Shade of Magic by Victoria Schwab. This is a book that follows Kel, who is an Antari, which is a blood magician, and usually in Red London, which is where he lives, all of the magicians there have this kind of elemental magic. Antari, though, are quite rare because obviously he can wield magic spells with his blood, and so because he has this rare ability, he can also traverse different types of Londons, so parallel Londons. And so there's red, white, grey, and black. Black London is like a folk tale that everyone is scared with at nighttime, like you tell it to your kids so they go to bed and don't misbehave. So Black London is off the table, but Kel travels through red, white and grey Londons in order to give messages to the royal families, because he is working with the royal family in Red London. And when he's in one of the Londons, he comes across Lila Bard and a magical relic, and the three of those kind of combine and a lot of things ensue afterwards. But this does a good job of setting up Kel as a character and not introducing Lila straight away, so you're not overwhelmed with multiple perspectives when you're first starting out. And it's also a very easily descriptive world, so it's not, you know, over the top with its prose, but it's descriptive enough that you get rooted in the setting. So I like it for that reason. It's really easy to read and it's a great starting point, and it's got great characters too that you can get on board with rooting for. So that's why I also want to give this as a recommendation in this video, because it is one that I started with many years ago. Obviously I'm rereading it now. It has reread value. It's enjoyable just if you're starting reading it. And Victoria Schwab has a lot of different titles across adult, middle grade and young adult as well. So if you like this, you can definitely try her other stuff as well. But if A Darker Shade of Magic was a bit intimidating for you because of its length, I would recommend a novella, Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon Maguire. This is a set of novellas following interweaving characters. I would recommend starting at the beginning and maybe in An Absent Dream if you want to jump around, but otherwise try and read them chronologically. They follow kids who are experiencing that Narnia phenomenon, so there is a doorway that is specifically tailored to who they are as a human being, what their personality is like, and when they go through that doorway, they feel like they are part of that world essentially. But then usually there is a doorway back, and the doorway always says, are you sure? Like, you've got to be sure. And so sometimes they cross through without actually realizing that it's a doorway home, or home, the human world. And then they really feel like they have been separated from where they belong. And nobody obviously believes them that they've been back and forth through these doorways, because magic doesn't exist. So it's following a school where these characters can go, where the principal of the school has been through her own doorways. And so it is a place of belonging with a lot of found family. And even though it is very short, the concept is really easy to latch onto, because probably a lot of us read Harry Potter or the Chronicles of Narnia as kids, and those stories deal with going through a doorway into like a portal world. And this is very much in that same kind of wheelhouse. So already it's feeling familiar and you haven't even started reading it yet. And I really loved the kind of whimsicalness and the world building, and again the found family, which is why I would definitely recommend these. I really like the audiobooks as well, and they're also very short audiobooks, so if you don't want something that feels like a massive undertaking, these are really easy to get into as well. Then I'm going to talk about a popular one because I also read and loved this, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a story about an orc, so already it's really tapping into those magical fantasy elements, but really grounding it in this cozy setting where this character has got this large sum of money from when she was a mercenary but doesn't want to do that anymore, and so she goes to a city and opens a coffee shop. And this is a coffee shop that is supposed to exist in a city where no one knows what coffee is yet, so it follows her chronicling all of her interactions with suppliers and starting to build a steady customer base and just get her head around this new kind of lifestyle when she's trying to leave her old one behind. And so it's a really great exploration of characters and interactions, and it's very familiar because, you know, I'm from Melbourne and we drink coffee all the time. coffee is our thing. And so when I was reading this, I felt very much at home, even though it follows an orc. So it is already a very relatable thing. It also makes you hungry because it talks about baked goods and cinnamon scrolls. So it feels very warm, inviting, and cozy. And it's definitely something that I would recommend you start with if you are trying to get into fantasy, because it does have those fantastical elements, but it's also very rooted in something very familiar to us, like going and getting a coffee with a friend. So this is one that I would highly recommend. I absolutely loved it, and it was in my best books video of 2022, and I'm very eager to reread it. And then also read Bookshops and Bone Dust, which is another book coming by this author, but not until November in 2023. Next up, we do have a longer book. So this is the third last book that I'm going to talk about in this video. And true to form, I love Brandon Sanderson, and I'm going to recommend The Final Empire, which is book 1 in the Mistborn series. However, before you click away from the video, I promise I'm putting this in here because it is legitimately a beginner fantasy book. So I read this initially when I was also getting into the genre, and it really takes this main character, Vin. She gets found by Kelsier, who is starting this crew who are essentially trying to put a heist together to overthrow the Lord Ruler of this entire government. So it is a heist novel set in a fantasy world, and it does have a very intense magic system because it's got a lot of rules, but it's also very visual, and the writing is not flowery to the point where you get lost in a sentence. That's one of the strengths, I think, of Brandon Sanderson's writing. It's very descriptive without being overwhelming, and so when I'm recommending this, I'm recommending it for the simple almost writing, because it's really easy to just get sucked into it, and then you realize after looking up after an hour that you've read 100 pages and you're like, where did that time go? So it's one of those books, and the story is incredibly compelling, but also if you don't want to read a very long trilogy, this can also be read kind of as a standalone. The story essentially wraps up in this book, but there are obviously threads that will naturally continue it along with the world building into the sequels. So if you are worried about committing to a book this long and going, Brandon Sanderson has a massive shelf dedicated to him at the bookstore, what am I getting into? Just this book. It is okay, I promise. That's why I want to recommend this, because it is a story that I have gone back to and reread and really loved as well, and that's why I'm recommending it too. It has great reread value, but it's also great the first time round, and it doesn't have to be a huge commitment if you don't want it to be. The second last book that I want to talk about is a graphic novel called Lore Olympus, and I'm recommending this because it is a Hades and Persephone retelling, which seem to be having a resurgence of sorts. I see a lot of people recommending different Hades and Persephone-esque stories lately, and so that's why I brought this one into this video, because this obviously is a graphic novel, so it is really palpable. It is quite visual, obviously, with its storytelling, and so because you can literally see the story playing out on the page, it's really easy to get sucked into it with all of the different layouts and expressions, and you get on board with the characters, you can empathize with them that way. And it seems also quite familiar because obviously these are the Olympian gods, and so you recognize a lot of the names, obviously like Hades, Persephone, but also Athena and Apollo and Ares. So there are lots of characters in here that are reimagined in a way that feels familiar. This also has excellent humor in it as well. So if you want something that has darker themes and character building, but also a levity to it at the same time, this is a great place to start. And then lastly in this video is a book that I absolutely love and adore. It is also adult fantasy, and it is Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell. This is a story that follows Falkio, and it's got a really Three Musketeers banter-esque vibe to it, which I think is really enjoyable and important, because when you go into a new story, you want to absolutely be captured by the tone of it. Within reading 7 pages of this, I was laughing. It really manages to capture that immediate tone and situation of where the characters are, what is happening to them, and how they need to get out of it. And I think that's really important in painting a picture for someone who is obviously into fantasy, but also someone who is very new to fantasy as well. So this is definitely a book that I would also recommend, because again, it's not too long, but it's also a completed series, so you don't have to worry about forgetting everything when you're starting something completely brand new and very alien to you. It is already complete. But this is my last recommendation for this video. Let me know if you have read any of these. I would really be interested to know. I also gave most of them 4 if not 5 stars, so they are definitely some of my favorites in this video as well. But thank you again so much for watching. Come and chat to me down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.